extravaganza that's going to be happening, I think he said October 6th, which is a week from today. So I told Paul Buresh, of course. So, Paul, the audience is all primed and ready for you. What are you promoting next week?
Well, Morgan, your trivia memory serves you well because, yes, friends, it's that time of the year once again. It's the fall meet for the New England Vintage Electronics Club, October 6th, 2018 in Brookline, New Hampshire. Come on down for any type of radio equipment, any type of electronics ranging from the 1920s all the way up to the 1970s, that vintage audio, maybe that Henry Kloss, that KLH that was made across the river there from you guys in Cambridge, that fine-sounding AM/FM table sets. You know, it's all there, and it's always fun to see the sets, to meet the collectors, to talk a little bit about radio, to find out what people are still listening to. But there's all kinds of things there now that we haven't seen so much of in the past that are getting very, very popular. Component stereo, you know, that Marantz or that TIAC or that Fisher amplifier that you grew up with in the 70s or 80s with your speakers and your turntable, and who knows what you listen to, anything from Black Sabbath, Jerry Rafferty, Kool and the Gang, who knows what you listen to, but
Jefferson Airplane.
It's all there, and people, Jefferson Airplane.
I say that for obvious reasons.
Surrealistic Pillow, yes. You know, and those guys lived a tough life. It's quite amazing, actually, that, you know, they last as long as they do, you know, given all that went on in that era. Needless to say, maintenance of the body was not a premier concern in as much as it is, I think, today. So, God bless them. But, yeah, the sounds that made it on the radio, made it on the stereos, all those vinyl records are coming back, by the way, big time, big.
Oh, it's been about 5 years since they hit rock bottom and now have bounced back up.
Yeah, there's a lot of contemporary artists who are pressing vinyl. There's a lot of machinery that was put into mothballs in the 50s and 60s in the United States that is being unmothballed, and some of it is quite expensive, you know, for the newer releases that are finding their way onto vinyl. But there's been this whole, you know, surge of interest. If you go into a maybe Newbury Comics over in Norwood, you go in, and what do you see? You see a lot of records. You see tons of them. And many of them came from people who had stored them away, and they're in pretty good shape. And, well, what do you play them on? Well, you need some type of electronics, probably a nice turntable and a amp and a nicely matched set of speakers, and those are the types of things you'd see at our events.
And I have a question. I was watching... I even forget, I think it was Smithsonian, and they were mentioning back in the 20s, there was a street in New York, an avenue, I don't know, but there were 24 or more stores, each dedicated to radio purchases, because this is when the radio had an explosion of popularity. Do you know that street?
Well, you know, it's around Cortlandt Street, and it's in the area that was formerly occupied by the Twin Towers, the World Trade Center. It was an area fondly known to every hobbyist in electronics and radio enthusiast in the New York, New Jersey area as Radio Row.
Yes, it was Radio Row.
What you had were essentially, you know, more than 20, but you had a large number of stores that sold parts, that sold kits, that sold complete sets, that serviced sets, that sold tubes. You know, it was a dream for, you know, a little kid who wanted to get into electronics or somebody who was in that hobby or in that business.
And this was back in the 1920s.
Well, starting in the late 20s and running through the 30s, 40s, and up into the 50s. And, you know, there is believe it or not, there's a fellow, and the name of his business it escapes me right now, but there are a couple of folks who had businesses on the row who wound up moving over into other parts of New York, and they still service the electronics hobby. But, you know, sadly, the area declined, and with the change in consumer electronics, you know, their business became less profitable for many of these folks. But, it's either a positive or a negative term, depending on who you talk to. Urban renewal strikes. Yeah. And a large section of that area is cleared for the upcoming development of the World Trade Center buildings. And I've spoken to a couple of folks from New York, and one fellow who's written a couple of articles on Radio Row, and he said it was heartbreaking to go down there and see the stores, that sell the entire building, and they couldn't even clean it all out. And he'd watched the effluvia, as Gene Shepard would say, come down the chutes. They would just be throwing out cabinets and radios and TVs and tubes and parts into the dumpsters to haul them off as they had to clear out the buildings, for the renewal of the area. But that was sort of, the center of that hobby for the New York, New Jersey folks for many, many, many years. And if you look it up online, you'll find some photos and some interesting stories. I have a couple of friends down in the New Jersey Antique Radio Club who, remember going on down there and trolling around looking for odd parts and pieces and bargains, and it was all pre-big box stores. You go down and you see the local dealer and swap stories and find what you could find and maybe do a little dickering. So it was a great place to be in its day.
I have a break to take. I'm going to have you do this now, and I'm going to have you do it a couple more times before we let you go in 15, 20 minutes. If you could give the web location where people can find out all the information, who, what, when, where, why, how, of this event next Saturday. And you said Brookline, New Hampshire, correct?
Brookline, New Hampshire. It's about an hour north of Boston. It's a very scenic little place. You take a ride up there, not only you could check out the radio show, but you could probably come home with a pumpkin and a bag of apples. And the web address is www.nearc.net to find out more.
Okay, we'll take our break and we'll talk more.
Yes, sir.
Paul Buresh about classic old-time radios. Time and temperature here at WBZ.